Welcome to the PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. Why is it that as providers, we are always the last on our list? That we have systematically made it a habit of putting others' needs above our own? We're going to dive into that topic and so many more with our guest today, Don Martinez. Don has a background in primary care and working in pediatrics and has recently transitioned into academia. He's going to share his experience, what it was like to be in a peds office throughout the pandemic, and the toll that took on his mental and physical health. Without further ado, here he is, PA Don Martinez. Don, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you this morning and all the listeners out there.
Yeah, so I would love it if you could just take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us a little bit about you and about your career path as a PA so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a PA for 16 years. Actually started out as a social worker and then transitioned over to being a PA after about two years in social work. Went back to school, became a PA. I've worked primarily in primary care. My first couple of years out of school were in family practice, and then I transitioned to a community-based organization serving HIV-positive individuals where we did medication management as well as primary care for these folks. It was a great experience. I loved it. Unfortunately, as anybody that's worked in that arena knows, funding is not always the most stable, and so there was a lot of fluctuation. And unfortunately, I had to leave that, but then stumbled into another career that I really loved, which was going back into family practice and then eventually transitioning full-time into pediatrics, where I spent the last 7 years or so of my clinical practice working with kiddos, which was great. Pediatrics is amazing. Best specialty on earth. And the parents are awesome too. And then, so along the way, I also got into doing some teaching, adjunct work at a local university, actually, where I attended the PA program. So I did a lot there. And then just kind of stumbled into some work. And the last couple of years that I was in my clinical practice, I actually had a split role. I was in administration doing professional development while also seeing patients. And so it's kind of 20 hours in each realm, so to speak. So I did that. And then late 2022, I actually made the decision to transition over to academia and left clinical practice and am now teaching full-time at Midwestern University in Downers Grove.
Cool. So it sounds like you've done a lot of things over the course of your clinical career. It's interesting to hear you say pediatrics is the best specialty. And I love the parents because I feel like the parents scare people away from going into pediatrics.
They can, absolutely. And I think, the one thing that I've always kept in mind that has really helped me with them is just to, number one, remember that the parents are scared. They don't know what's going on. They're feeling very helpless for this tiny little human that means more to them than anything else in the world. And so, if you go into it with that perspective, I feel like you can build better relationships with them. And generally, as long as the parents know that you truly care about the kiddos, they're okay with you. And so even, when you have to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, they respect that if they know that you care and you're really trying to help their little one get better.
Yeah, awesome. We have a PA that we see at our pediatrician's office and we love him. Like I can't imagine seeing anyone else for our kids. They love him. My kids know I'm a PA, he's a PA. So we have this kind of, special relationship, but it is such a, when you have kids, I think when something happens to my kids, I can't be objective. I cannot be the one that is diagnosing them. I've never practiced in pediatrics. So first of all, I don't know clinically what's wrong with them. Second of all, I'm way too emotionally involved and way too close to the situation to be objective when it comes to my own kids.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I'm the same way with my parents. My parents are overall, they're very healthy, but they're later 60s. So they're starting to have occasional issues here and there. And yeah, I find the same thing. It's very hard to stay objective because I'm so emotionally involved with it. And I see what's going on, when they're home or the issues that they're having. And so I get your point 100%. It's, and it's good to be able to recognize that, because sometimes you get, especially clinician, you get the parents that come in and they don't recognize that. And it's like, okay, let's separate this out. Let's make sure we get to the root here. So thank you for realizing that on behalf of all the pediatric PAs, because let me tell you, that makes a world of difference.
Good. I'm glad I'm doing the right thing by taking them to see someone else as opposed to trying to diagnose them on my own at home, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would love it if you could tell us a little bit more about this half and half role that you had, where you're doing some clinical and some professional development. I feel like I have a general idea of what professional development is, but not what it means in terms of this was half of my job. So what did that role entail?
So that role kind of was a catch-all, and it changed actually a lot over the 4 years that I did it. So initially it started out as a volunteer position, and our system had hired on a director of advanced practice. And so she kind of came in with the vision of how can I unite all of these APRNs and PAs in this big organization? Because we were at that time, one of the larger organizations in the Chicago area. But we had about 500 advanced practice clinicians, which is what they called them, spread out through the area with no real structure, no real set of expectations, no guidance. So really just kind of this group they weren't sure what to do with. And so got involved in a group just trying to do some problem solving. Got very involved in developing a mentoring program to pair new clinicians up with experienced clinicians and help them kind of integrate into the system a little bit. And that ended up becoming a part-time job, essentially, which was, everything kind of started launching, and they said, okay, we need some oversight for that. And so a lot of my work in professional development really focused in on helping new grads thrive in a large healthcare system. And so that was the crux of my work initially, because we had a hard time retaining, obviously, any organization that, doesn't really have a strong centralized leadership structure for APCs is going to lose them. And that's part of why this position was created. So we didn't have a lot of really experienced folks. So we had a lot of new grads coming in. And so I put together programs for the new grads. And so my week would vary. Sometimes I would be out teaching the programs, and then eventually I took a step back from the actual teaching of the programs and let other people do that, and then just did the oversight. So the scheduling, making sure that, we were updating our cases. So we did a new grad boot camp where the new clinicians would spend 8 hours with us in the simulation center, and we would cover various things, and we would kind of show them how to access resources within the network when you had this. One of our cases was a patient who had an acute allergic reaction. Okay, so how do you run through this? What do you do after the patient leaves? What security reports need to be taken care of? How do you print out a transfer sheet in the medical record system? And so, I would do stuff like that. We did a lot of problem solving. So, managers would reach out and say, hey, I've got this PA, I'm having some issues. And, our team would come together and we would do an evaluation and identify, okay, is this a professionalism issue? Is this a medical knowledge deficit? Very much like education and remediation, except for actual clinicians. And then we would try to develop programs either to help the individual, or we would even go that one step further and look at and say, is this a systemic issue? So do we need to create a standardized onboarding program for anybody that works in GI, for example? That was one of the areas that we focused on. So it was a really cool job. I liked it because it gave me a break from the clinic. It was hard though, because again, being away from clinic a couple of days a week, and the patient needs never stop. So yeah, it was an interesting balance.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like to me, like when I hear you describing this, if I'm a new grad and I'm comparing two positions, and one is with a network that has this robust program, who has obviously dedicated man hours and resources and cares about getting new grads to be clinically comfortable and also helping them to be plugged into the resources that they need, I am choosing that job, 10 out of 10 times if it sounds like the organization cares about me more. And I get it. The organization is doing this because it decreases recruiting costs and it decreases turnover and it improves patient care. But as a provider, I think part of that is always a little bit selfish, right? What am I getting out of this? Am I going to be mentored? Am I going to be a better clinician when I leave this position than when I enter, especially at the beginning of our career? Because I think as we go along, whether we have a program like this or not, we figure things out, right? We figure out who to call and what to print and what to do. But, trial by fire, right? Here we are. This thing happened. We have to figure out what to do. But to say, hey, we don't want you to be alone when you end up in this situation. We don't want it to be the first time that you've ever thought about what to do, that there's a protocol or that there's a step or that this is who you call. That is such a wonderful support to provide to providers.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it's funny that you say that because I always looked at it from the perspective of the new person. And, I was always known when I got pulled into a meeting, I was always known as the person that asked this question: what are we doing to make these clinicians want to stay with us? Because so many times the discussion comes up about turnover and it's like, they lay out all these things about how, they use this for education. They use this for this. They use this for that. And my question always is, well, what are we doing that makes them want to stay? And so that was where a lot of the programming came in, because you're right, you can learn all that stuff, but it's really hard to learn that. And it can take years to be able to develop a good network and to be able to feel connected. And then, selfishly, I wanted to see PAs really be able to start rising up the ranks as well, because, you oftentimes would be excluded from leadership meetings, setting course for clinics. And these are the things that we're doing day to day, but have no ability to give input and guidance and direction to. And if you talk to a lot of the execs, one thing I always heard was, well, we have no problem with a PA being at the table, but show us a PA that's capable of being at the table and contributing in a meaningful way. Which is true, because as PAs, we don't often get instruction in leadership and instruction in, the larger kind of macro system. We learn a lot about practice in school. We learn a lot in clinical rotations about caring for patients, but that big system picture is kind of missing. And so one of my goals with a lot of the work that I did was, how can I also help PAs and NPs get the skills that they need to be leaders and to help give input into their clinical practice? Because, physicians get us to a point, administration gets us to a point, but they don't always gel. And so I think it's important to have that voice and say, hey guys, this is what we need to do.
You know how most people have so much stuff that their homes feel cluttered and downright messy? The Simplified Decluttering Planner will help you to achieve a more simplified, organized home this year. Head to the link in the show notes to purchase your downloadable or digital calendar and use code ThePAIsIn for an exclusive discount. On the first day, you'll set up a declutter station in your home, and you can customize this journey to fit your schedule and go at your own pace. If you want your home to feel different next year, you're going to want to download the Simplified Decluttering Company's Planner today. And that is a very different skill set of communication and analysis and problem solving. And even I have a friend who's the director of a department at a big health network in my area. And sometimes I'm like, what do you do all day? Right? So what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm onboarding, I'm recruiting, I'm sending these emails, I'm sitting in on these meetings. And I'm like, okay, so that sounds corporate. That sounds very different than, seeing a problem, seeing a patient, diagnosing a problem and doing a note. That's a totally different skill set than sitting into a compensation committee meeting. You could put me in that meeting and I feel pretty strong in my communication skills, but I don't speak that language of corporate healthcare, of systems, of administration. That's a very different world than the one where I feel very comfortable, which was in an exam room, in an operating room with a patient. That I've got down. The other place, I would be like a fish out of water in that situation.
Yeah, it is hard. It was, I remember even when I started that role, just learning the language and learning how to navigate all of these different things that I wasn't really familiar with. And so, that kind of became another push in what I did as well, was trying to think of how can I give people, the understanding, or how can I help them get this understanding without kind of hitting all the roadblocks that I hit on the way there. So it was, it's important. And I think one of the biggest takeaways is, at the end of the day, working in the corporate is not that different than working in the patient care. Sure, the language is different. Sure, there's some, navigation skill sets that are a little bit different in terms of being able to work with people. But, at the end of the day, you're still diagnosing a problem, looking for the best solution, and making it, in this case, patient-centered means meeting the needs of the healthcare organization while meeting the needs of the clinician. So it's really the same kind of work, just in a different venue and with a different language.
Yeah, I do think that we are sort of undercutting our ability to transfer those skills. So these are skills that we're using anyway. I find this a lot when people are talking about negotiating. They're like, oh, I don't feel comfortable having this hard conversation. But I told a patient this week that they have a massive tumor in their lung. And I had that conversation without a problem. I'm like, well, this is the same, but different, right? So these are the same skill sets in a different setting. The setting is what's tripping you up, but the skills are already there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And it's, I 100% am of the belief that, clinicians need to be at these tables, because we have to be able to advocate for ourselves. And this is, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but just even in terms of wellness and balance in a career, you have to be able to advocate for yourself and create a structure, because, administration doesn't always understand what it's like being in that patient room, because so often they haven't been in there with you. They don't know what you're dealing with. They don't know what it's like. They're looking on paper and saying, well, sure, you can see a new patient every 15 minutes and you only need 15 minutes for a newborn visit. Great, but you haven't been in there with me with that first-time mom who needs a lot more than 15 minutes to ask all of the questions they have about this little itty-bitty creature that they are now responsible for to help grow. So I think it's really important to be a part of that. And I think in terms of overall wellness, it's important for providers to really get in and start being in these conversations and having a voice.
Sure. I think there's so much of the work that we do that is not captured by the endpoints that we're testing about that data, and it's not charted, but it's a 20-minute conversation to reassure that patient and to ensure their compliance and that they're doing what we think is best for them health-wise. So I want to change gears here a little bit and talk about charting and EMR and how, we're in this clinic and we have this number of patients we have to see, and we have to get our notes done, right? We have to get them done in a timely manner so we don't get that phone call that we're delinquent. We have to get them done, well, so that it's really reflecting what we did from a history and physical and assessment and plan standpoint, but also that we have to do a lot of them every day without fail to get our patients, what they need from a documentation standpoint. So in your experience, what tips can you give us to sort of maximize our efficiency, make sure we're charting the right things, but also that we're getting it done, and so we can keep moving?
I think the biggest thing is just taking the time up front to invest some time in learning the systems, because so many of the issues that I've seen with EMR systems are people really just not knowing what functions are even available to them and what exists to make their life easier. Because fortunately, we're at a state with technology where there really are a lot of shortcuts that exist within these systems that help make your life easy. So, for example, it took me a lot of time, but I actually built several convenience panels into my lab orders. And so, for example, anytime I saw a pediatric patient with an elevated BMI, I had a whole set of orders and referrals that I gave them universally. I talked to the parents about it. We had a whole discussion. And rather than hunting and pecking for each of those orders, I had it saved. In pediatrics, we saw a lot of mono. And so if I suspected mono, I had a whole set of orders that I would order for that. So lab work, throat culture, and so forth. And so I built a lot of that. It took time at the beginning, no doubt, but that extra time I invested while getting to know the system saved me oodles of time on down the road, and it's amazing because I actually used to be on part of my professional development work was creating workshops that talked about efficiency. And so I had this algorithm where I could do click counts, and it was amazing how quickly something like ordering 3 tests and how many clicks you would save overall, which, when you do it and you're like, okay, 12 clicks, not a big deal. Well, if you save 12 clicks with each patient, you see 20 patients a day for the entire year, all of a sudden you have an astronomically high number and you're going, okay, that did save some time, even if I didn't realize it at the front. I'd also say, network with other people around you, because there are going to be, the system we used was Epic, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. I know there are a lot of other great systems, and I'm not promoting one or the other. But we used Epic. And so one of the things that I noticed with that was there's a lot of different ways to do the same kind of thing. And so just even talking to other providers and seeing, okay, how did you use this system to make it work for you, really gave me some tips. And then I went to efficiency webinars, and I, sometimes would take an hour here and there and go to one of the Epic classes. And I know we all don't have an exorbitant amount of time, but, in my experience, if you're very selective about which of these sessions you attend and which ones really match kind of what you need from the system, it's a good investment of time. So yeah, you're spending an hour going to this, but then if you can learn a couple of quick shortcuts that save you time, it's going to pay off in dividends by doing that. And I think that's one thing as clinicians, sometimes you just look at it and go, oh, another class, or oh, do I really want to do this? And I think, it's recognizing that, okay, it's not going to be immediate gratification. I think that's the other thing that we all struggle with, is we want to see that effect right now. It's not going to be that way. And then another great tip is knowing what you can and can't do within the system. So if you have the ability to pre-chart, for example, pre-chart when you can. That will save you time. Come up with a rhythm. So, one of the things that I always did was, and when the patient was in the room with me, I would actually document their assessment and plan. I would put their medications in. Any patient information that I gave them, I would record all of that. So then when I went to my desk, I really just had to fill in a few other details, like the physical exam findings or, relevant parts of the history. So I would do part of the charting right there in real time, which, number one, decreased the amount of errors that I had with my charting, because when you're seeing 12 kids who all have coughs and colds, it can get a little bit confusing to remember what you told each of them, although it's generally the same stuff.
More what they told you, right? What they told you.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. And some of the stories, man, the kids come up with some interesting stories, let me tell you. But yeah, so I think that was another great tool that I used. And just using other, if you have the ability to use other people's templates, use that. If you have stuff that you're doing all the time and the system has an opportunity for you to capture that as like a speed button, for example, use it. So, I had the same kind of patient information I gave for anybody that had a viral URI that talked about why we don't use antibiotics and all of that good stuff that we all know all the time. And rather than reinventing the wheel and searching for this, which I did for the first year I used the system, I finally said, okay, I'm making this a speed button. It's already clicked in. And so all I do, rather than having to pull it up, copy and paste, I just hit the accept button and boom, it's right there. So just identifying shortcuts when you can and then actually using them. That's the other key. You can set this all up, but if you don't use any of it, it's not going to help you.
Yeah. I think, as you're going through your clinic today, tomorrow, this week, this month, think about the things that are really pissing you off, right? When you get something and you have to document and you're like, this is just so clunky. It's taking me forever. I'm pushing this note to the end of the day because I'm dreading. I know it's going to be a big bear of, how can you make that charting less burdensome? And just don't try to do it all at once, because if you say, I'm going to make every note a speed, that's going to make you feel overwhelmed. But like, what was frustrating about today? What's the most common thing that I saw today? If you can speed up that upper respiratory infection note, okay, one thing down, then next week you're going to tackle the UTI note, then the next week. And then before you know it, you will have efficient charting for the majority of things. You're never going to have all of the things that you're going to see templated. But if you can get those really common, most frequent visits so that they're less frustrating, then you're golden.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the other thing too is, recognize what tools can be used on the fly, because, so many providers don't use that. So for example, the Epic has a lot of functionality that when you're entering lab orders, you can actually make a convenience panel right from the orders in real time as you're doing it. It's 3 extra clicks. The patients don't even notice that you're doing it. And then you're done with it. And so, it saves you all this time, especially when you have that realization, you're like, gosh, this is the 5th time today I have written out all of these lab orders. So again, think about where those sticky points are. And I like your approach too, of just kind of dividing it up and saying, okay, this week I'm going to focus on URIs, and next week maybe I'm going to focus on, the pukey poopy viruses. I'm going to think about stuff like that. So I think that's a good approach too. And like you said, charting is evil. And, a lot of these, let's be real, a lot of these EMR systems are data miners, and there's a lot of reporting that is being done. And I think that's the other frustration for a lot of clinicians, because we look at it and go, okay, I don't need all of this information necessarily, which isn't always the right attitude to have, because having been on the corporate side, actually you do need that information, because that is also what helps keep us funded, which is, insurance companies want to see this data and that data. And so we may not understand it on the clinic side, but on the back side, there is some use for it. And so, just remember, everybody is trying to do their part of the job to make the business successful. And I think that was one thing that opened my eyes working in this dual role, was how much went on each side that I wasn't aware of.
Most PAs bring home a decent paycheck, but aren't sure that they're investing enough or what approach to take for student loans. Caleb Pepperday is a certified financial planner who works specifically with APPs. Seeing that PAs, including his wife, were overlooked and physicians were treated with respect in the financial planning industry, he sought to rectify this mismatch by serving PAs with the excellence we deserve. Caleb's mission is to help make financial planning affordable for APPs regardless of their asset level. Head to advancedpracticeplanning.com and hit the Schedule a Conversation button to book your free consult. Your money is your largest wealth building tool, and failing to utilize it well could leave you wanting to retire without enough in your accounts, or still having student loan payments when your kids are ready to attend college themselves. Caleb's clients can enjoy their money guilt-free while feeling confident in their savings and investments. Head to the show notes, tap the link, and call Caleb for your free consultation. On the call, Caleb will help you to determine whether his one-time or ongoing financial planning services are right for you. And I think you and I have both been around long enough that we know that it used to be a handwritten note, like a handwritten soap note that they were sending, to the insurance company that had handwritten vitals and, subjective, objective. Those days are gone. We are not going back to handwritten notes. So we have to just accept this is what it is. This is the amount of information that is a part of these notes, and, kind of make peace with the fact that it's not going away anytime soon.
Oh, no. That's my biggest advice. That's one of my biggest pieces of advice too, is just stop complaining about it. Like you said, it's not going away. It is, it's like remote work. We might, you may not be your favorite thing ever, but it's probably not going away. That is kind of stale already. So stop complaining, because if you, spend a minute every patient encounter talking, complaining about the EMR system, that's a minute that you could be using to make yourself more efficient, stay in a more positive mindset, and get stuff done a little bit quicker. So, trying to change that mindset and reframe that mindset. And I get it. Like you said, we have a lot going on. We have a lot of expectations coming at us from every different angle, but, trying to keep yourself centered and positive is going to make using the EMR system a whole lot easier.
Yeah. So speaking of things that aren't going anywhere, I think especially in primary care, and I'm sure also in pediatrics, you have seen this increasing burden of mental health and the struggle that our patients are facing, but also that we're having as a provider. I would love it if you could share a little bit about your own journey with sort of navigating this increasing burden of especially primary care folks being the point of care for mental health for our patients, but also how we can take good care of our patients while we're also taking good care of ourselves and juggling our own mental health and wellness, and how we kind of balance those things as best as we can.
All right. Well, do you have about 6 hours? No, I'm just kidding.
I know, right? It's like, just like give us like 10 minutes on how to be healthy while everyone's dying and, really struggling with their mental health.
And then go have some pizza, by the way, because we're giving you free pizza to increase your wellness. No, it was a struggle. I will be honest with you. Especially the pandemic, I saw so many different elements that I hadn't seen before. There was a lot of fear in the community, obviously. Kids were cut off from their social networks. Sometimes parents were having to work 2 to 3 jobs to support everything. Families were condensing into these multi-generational homes, and it was a lot. And, and I don't think, and just generally speaking, I was shocked from the time I started pediatrics to when I left in 2022, just how many behavioral health concerns I was seeing. They were always there, but I would say it was, maybe 1 or 2 a week, even that. By the end, it was like, oh my goodness, almost every patient seemed to be having some degree of struggle. Some were a lot worse than others, but it was there. And I started noticing that, I was taking a lot of it home. Because number one, my patient burden was up to here. I had so many people trying to get in, needing care, and then needing lots of care. And then ultimately, where I lived, we're very underserved in terms of mental health and behavioral health, especially for children, not being able to get them where they needed to go. So it was very frustrating. And then just dealing with my own issues with burnout and coming through the pandemic and, life that happens outside of the clinic that we have to be able to compartmentalize to take care of our patients. So I did find myself struggling a lot with mental wellness and kind of staying focused. And I will be honest, and I know some people will say, oh, as a PA, you should never say this, but I actually started seeing a therapist. I recognized where I was going, and I recognized that I needed some support with that. And I did what I needed to do. And I am and I firmly encourage anybody listening that feels like they might need some outside help, get that help. There is absolutely no shame in utilizing these services. I mean, if you had high blood pressure, hypothyroidism, any of these other health conditions, you will be taking care of it. And to me, being able to say, I go see a therapist should be as natural as saying, I took my thyroid pill this morning. And there shouldn't be a lot of shame associated with that, even for us clinicians, and not that we're above a bar, but and part of being a clinician is recognizing your abilities or where you're struggling and being able to take care of that, whether it's mentally, physically, whatever that is. So that was one big thing that I did. The other thing that I kind of did was I started shifting my mindset a little bit in the clinic and, starting setting more firm boundaries with my job.
Yay!
Yeah, I know, right? It's all that stuff we talk about in school, and then you actually get into practice and you're like, who needs a boundary? Just do whatever. So, part of my job became work from home. And so I actually set up what you're seeing behind me here, which is this room, which is, stuff that I enjoy. So it was like a little bit more pleasurable to be in a working atmosphere. But on top of that, I set a timer. And when my time hit that my day was over, I walked out of this room and shut the door and did not come back in until the next morning. I took my email off of my phone. If it was something clinical, I had we had obviously an app for clinical use only, that if there was a clinical emergency, they could reach me through the app. But other than that, I disconnected from the job. I stopped taking add-on patients. I, was a little bit more strict in adhering to the policies of our clinic that, if you were late, and we had a very generous late policy. We let our patients show up to a half hour late before we asked them to reschedule, which was crazy, But obviously within reason, obviously if mom was trying to get Junior out of the house and they couldn't stop, having accidents long enough to get here, I'm not going to turn them away completely for that. But if you're coming in for your wellness visit and you're an hour late, I think you're going to have to reschedule because I can't make all these other people wait. And I saw an article actually during all of this time, and I wish I could remember the title and who wrote it. But of course, it was so great that I read it and just immediately clung to the ideas and then let everything else go. But it really talked about how in corporate medicine, a lot of the business leaders rely on the personality traits of the clinicians. And so what that means is they are really banking on the fact that we care so much about our patients that we put their needs above our own, and that, they don't change staffing levels. They don't add extra clinicians because they rely on the fact that, when we hear that so-and-so is here and they need care, that we're just going to say, throw them on the schedule. Or, if you're walking out the door, if you're at your desk writing notes and somebody comes in, you're going to go, okay, I'm going to see this patient. And, sometimes that's okay. But when it's happening all the time and it becomes a habit, that's not okay. And that's impacting your own mental well-being, because then on top of what you need to finish all those charts we talked about earlier, now you're adding on another chart, another patient encounter, and you're making yourself crazy doing so. And the problem is when everybody in the clinic does that same kind of thing, there's absolutely no incentive for them to get additional support to help with the patient volume. And so, I started to recognize, like, hey, I've got to pull back. And, I did. I mean, because there was a point where I was leaving clinic every day 2 hours late, which as a healthcare provider, I get it. We're not always 9 to 5, but there should be some semblance of balance. When it's occasionally you're running late, okay. But when it's every time, that's no longer running late. That becomes your regular schedule. And, that was where I kind of had to draw the line and start saying, like, okay, I need to do this. And then I think the other thing I did for myself that really helped with my mental well-being was finally giving myself the okay to say, you know what? It's okay once in a while to call in sick, because mentally I need a break. Because, we are so quick to say, especially during the COVID era, I can't come to work. I've got COVID. Okay, I'm out for 10 days, when it all started, which was great. But we weren't doing the same when we were having, issues with our mental health and well-being. And to me, that's almost more dangerous than going in with the sniffles, because, when you've got all this other stuff rattling around in your noggin and you're not really taking care of it. Am I really hearing the patient? Am I really thinking through everything I need to? Am I making sure that my treatment plan is logical from A to B to C? And so I think that was the other thing, was I finally started recognizing, A, I need to do that. And then B, also, I need to take vacation time. We were so short-staffed during COVID and, afterward. And, I'm sure, like many organizations, our place didn't replace a lot of the people that left. And so, we were doing a lot more work with a lot less. And, then we had other people who were, going on leave of absences. And of course, our organization, when you were on a leave, we couldn't fill your job. And so everything just kind of fell to other people. So I started planning vacations, and I finally had to just say, you know what? It's not me leaving my colleagues shortchanged. It's the organization that is failing to plan for the fact that people are using the benefits that they are entitled to have through their employment. And, it was really shifting that mindset, which was harder than anything, I'll be honest with you. Like, I had a lot of the tools there, but it was just shifting that mindset and then being able to actually say, this is what I need to do. And then, like you said, setting those boundaries too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so much of what you're saying really resonated with me, that when I was burned out, when I was burned out, I was absolutely seeking therapy. I don't think anyone gets to be the point of being a provider without experiencing trauma, right? I think school is traumatic. Rotations are traumatic. Taking care of sick patients is hard to navigate mentally, and just like shut it off and go home and live your life without any burden of the suffering and the pain and all of the things that you're seeing on a daily basis. And I think, everyone in the world could benefit from therapy, but I think particularly those of us who work in healthcare, where we have a front row seat to this human suffering, and we're asked to help make these patients better. So hard, right? So hard to navigate these things. Everyone needs therapy. If you're feeling burned out, if you're struggling mentally, therapy is a great first step to really have a dedicated time to talk to someone, to get some tools so that you can navigate these things, because it's not sustainable to be burned out and struggling mentally and to have your job feel like the thing that's making those things happen. We're going to lose people, right? So if we have a burn rate that's higher than the new grads, it's not sustainable for these healthcare systems or these patients that are relying on us, for sure. And then the other thing I wanted to say about what you were saying is, when you're like, oh yes, we say yes to add-ons, and they come in at the end of the day, or they just show up at the office and the nurses are like, can you see them? I'm like, are we doing this? Are we just coming with no appointment? And they're like, well, Susie saw them last week and now they know that we're here. And so they're expecting to be seen. When I was super burned out, I reached the point that you reached where I started saying, no, I can't see one more patient. I can't take one more phone call. I cannot do that today. I can put it on the list for tomorrow, or we need some more help to, get this job done. And the thing that I experienced when I started doing that was it was very unpopular because it was very weird, right? Because everyone else was like, how dare you say no? Like the rest of us are saying yes. And I was like, well, I think it's wrong that we're all saying yes. Like, so I'm going to be the one that says no, which I didn't do from some moral high ground. I did it because I had to survive, right? I was at the point where I wasn't like, I am so much better than you, I'm going to start building boundaries. I was like, I'm going under, right? I'm drowning here. I have to say no out of self-preservation. We should not wait that long, right? And we should not have the culture be that when someone else builds a boundary, everyone else is like, rude, Karen is saying no to adding on patients. Like, no, we should say like, yay. Why can't we all be like Karen saying no to add-ons? Like, we need to shift the culture so we're encouraging people to have better boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's, it's funny because what I started to notice too, and I don't know if you noticed this when you started saying it, was that it was contagious. I started seeing people popping up where, they may not have said no. And then all of a sudden they were like, no, I'm going to say no to this, and, it became easier. And then it kind of became the norm. And I wouldn't say the norm, but we started seeing a lot more of it. And, and I think it's a number of things. Number one, it's mental well-being. Number two, it's recognizing that, a lot of, especially PAs and nurse practitioners are in salary-only models. And so, we're not dumb. We recognize that when we take on extra patients, we are, just adding profits to the bottom line for the company and not benefiting from that. And yes, we are altruistic to a point, but at the end of the day, I'm going to work because I do need a paycheck and I do need to sustain my life in addition to doing what fulfills me. And so, it's kind of recognizing that I'm not there just to line the coffers of the organization. And so I think that was a very, it was a very controversial way to look at it as well. And and obviously I didn't come from that point, but I think it was kind of one of those things that when you just started peeling, it's like an onion. When you start peeling those layers, you start seeing all of this. So it was like, I'm frying myself. And then what am I frying myself for? Because I'm actually not getting anything other than, a bad diet because I was at work 2 hours later and ran out of time to cook dinner when I got home or something of that sort. And so, grabbed some convenience food or something on the way home. So it's kind of looking at, I wasn't gaining anything from this other than, negativity and hurting myself through various ways. And so, yeah, it was okay to do that. So it's just interesting because so many of us are afraid to do that. And it's like, no, we got to start taking care of ourselves.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, I would love to sort of expand on this mental health burnout discussion to talk about things that are a little bit taboo, like weight and wellness, and how we can navigate those as a provider while also helping our patients to, prioritize their own weight and their own wellness. What has been your experience with this as you're practicing clinically?
Oh, all right. This is a very loaded topic for me. So, I've been on all ends of the spectrum. I've had moments in my career where I have been skinnier. I don't know if I've ever been completely skinny, so to speak, but, and then I've had moments in my career where I have been a lot heavier. And, full disclosure, I did undergo bariatric surgery about a year ago. So this is a topic near and dear to me. And I will say to me, one of the hardest parts about being in medicine and struggling with obesity in the medical setting has just been, the things that patients think it's okay to say to you. Like, sometimes you'll see a patient and they'll walk in and they're like, oh, wow, you've really gained weight. And I'm like, who thinks to say that to somebody? Or, oh, what happened to you? Well, I went through a lot of personal trauma. I've survived a pandemic. My family went to shit. Oh, sorry. My family went to stuff. All this stuff happened along the way. And you know what? I got through it the best that I could. So here I am, and it's like, it's just amazing. And it was very hard. Like it took a toll on me to be able to do that. But then, on the other side, and I realized like I was very sensitive to hearing that. But then on the other side, I also realized that I really felt like in some ways I was being a fraud to my patients because, here I am trying to help them navigate, weight management and all of this other information. And here I was struggling with it myself, and I felt like I was one of those parents that was like, do as I say, not as I do. And so it was very difficult for me. And, those were conversations I never shied away from because I felt like I owed it to my patient, but yet I knew I was kind of setting myself up. And I've heard comments. I mean, patients have said to the MA is like, oh yeah, he was talking about exercise. When's the last time he went out and ran a mile? And you would hear like stuff like that. Or you go like to a work function, they're like, should you really be eating that? It's kind of like, it's just amazing to me that, in this day and age, we still think it's okay to say stuff like that to people that are different sizes than us. And, and I handle it a couple different ways. I mean, sometimes I would just deflect it off. Sometimes I would, depending on how well I knew the patient and the rapport I had built, sometimes I even made, kind of a joke with it. I'd be like, hey, trust me, you want to take care of this while you have that beautiful teenage metabolism, because I would kill for that right now because I am over 40 and I'm trying to do the same thing I'm encouraging you to do. And let me tell you, it's a lot harder when I'm this age than it was when I was your age. And so sometimes I would make jokes about it. And sometimes, and this is what I felt was the best approach, was I would just very openly connect with the patient and be like, I get it. I'm there myself. And, I want to make sure that you're as healthy as you can be. And I'm taking the steps I need to take care of me, but I want to be able to give you the information you need to take care of you. And it's up to you to decide how to do that. But it was a very big struggle. And it was I'll be honest, it came to be a very, difficult area to navigate. And some days, like even especially when I was on the larger side, made me very uncomfortable even coming into the office because, whether or not I actually heard something, I had this perception that I was going to hear something or wonder what was being said behind my back because there was this mismatch between information I was providing and the information that I presented myself with. But I also along the way, which, obviously going through bariatric surgery, you go through a lot of different evaluations and you work through a lot of issues with it. But I learned to also love and accept where I was at and just recognize that, I had been through a pandemic. There had been some family issues that went on. My father had some very serious health issues. At one point, almost passed away. He had a very serious blood clot, pulmonary embolism, the whole 9 yards post-op. There was some other stuff going on with my family. And yeah, I didn't have the best coping mechanism. I will fully admit that. But we were also in a pandemic and a lockdown where I couldn't do the things that I usually would do to help cope with that. And so, maybe I ate more than I did, or maybe, I ordered stuff in because, well, there was no joy in life other than, eating at night during the pandemic and watching TV for like the billionth time. So it was, I would just be honest and say, honest to myself that I survived this era. I did the best that I could with the blocks that I had. It probably wasn't the best for me, but, to show myself a little bit of grace and understanding with that. And, and then I also use that then to connect to my patients. And so when we engaged in conversations about weight management, I would say the same thing to them. Like, as a society, we have been through a lot of trauma. And I'm sure in your life, you have also dealt with a lot of stuff. And there are ways that we deal with this and, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. And this is why I want to help you look at that. And so initially it started out as a very uncomfortable topic and I felt very self-conscious about having those conversations. But then I actually used my own struggles to connect with my patients, which was a little bit new for me. I usually kept that wall up between me and my patients and, as we're all trained to do. But, especially with pediatrics, when you kind of let that wall down a little bit. Now, I didn't get into every detail with my patients. Absolutely. They don't need to know all of that. But, when I would let that wall down a little bit, it really connected with them and it helped them with buy-in. So, eventually I started to feel like, just opening up a little bit and letting patients see the human part of me help them recognize that it was okay to be where they were at and okay for them to seek it out as well. And so, I would say ultimately the struggles almost helped enhance my practice a little bit. And it helped me remember why I was there and how to connect with patients. And it was weird because I had never been necessarily that vulnerable with patients, but I felt like it was in depth. And it was the tool that I needed to learn how to use because it wasn't like intuitive at all. Because we are learned to keep such a good, the separation of patient and state, it's like, oh, we don't cross that for good reason. And so it was weird for me to take the gap from here to maybe a little bit more like this and to kind of let some of that in. So I guess, I don't know if that answered your question completely, but yeah, it was just, I really just parlayed it into an opportunity to really connect with my patients on a deeper level and help them as I learned how to help myself.
Yeah. And I commend you both for your vulnerability to talk about it in a platform like this. And also to say to your patients, like, yeah, I know this is hard. I also struggle with this. And I think obesity is one of those things that you can't see hypertension. You can't see diabetes, right? You can't see some of these other diseases. So if you're struggling with something, someone could have no idea. But the fact that there's this external manifestation of this one thing that makes it so people can inappropriately say things or, observe things about you, but that you're saying like, hey, I'm owning this. I'm a person too. I have struggles too with my health and my wellness, and, taking ownership of that is going to have your patients see you as a person and not just a provider. And we are people, even though we can't cry every time we see a patient, right? So there's like a delicate balance between, letting ourselves be emotional and be vulnerable, but also be the clinician who's deciding things and diagnosing things and prescribing things. So Don, thank you so much for sharing both this part of your story and also your advice on efficiency and mental health and all of the things we have dived into today. If someone is listening and they're like, I need more of Don in my life, how can I get in touch with him? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
So the best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive on there. Otherwise, you can always reach out to me through my personal email as well, which is highly creative. So make sure you have a pen and paper so you never forget it. donmartinezpa@gmail.com. And it took me a long time to come up with that, let me tell you.
Awesome. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. It's been great to be able to share this with you and, be able to talk very openly about some of this. And I hope that it helps some of your listeners out. So thanks again. And thanks for all the work that you do to help make PAs heard. This is great.
I am just a huge fan of any conversation that reminds us that our mental and physical health and well-being should not come second to those of our patients. And that sometimes showing that vulnerability and reminding our patients that we are humans who happen to work in healthcare is such an important piece of the puzzle, that it builds trust and that it shares with them that we have health challenges, mental and physical things that we are dealing with also. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to another episode of The PA is In, This PA is Out. Congratulations, you've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.